I'm writing this from a hotel room in Denver, having lost everything I spent 10 years building. My career, my relationships, my reputation, all destroyed because of a lie I told myself was harmless. If you've ever been tempted to create a fake online persona, please read this story. Because what happened to me could happen to anyone, and the consequences are more devastating than you could ever imagine. My name is Alex Thompson, I'm 31, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life. I was a successful marketing director at a Fortune 500 company in Chicago, engaged to an amazing woman named Rachel, and surrounded by friends who respected and trusted me. But for the past 8 years, I'd been living a double life that would ultimately destroy everything I cared about. It started innocently enough in 2016. I was going through a rough patch. My father had just died, I was struggling with depression, and I felt invisible in my corporate job. Social media felt fake and performative, full of people posting highlight reels of lives that seemed so much more interesting than mine. That's when I discovered online writing communities, specifically fiction forums where people shared creative stories under pseudonyms. I created an account as Marcus Vale, a name that sounded sophisticated and mysterious. My backstory was simple. I was a freelance journalist who traveled the world writing about conflict zones and human interest stories. I'd been to war-torn countries, interviewed refugees, witnessed history in the making. None of it was true, but it felt like the person I wished I could be. The response was intoxicating. People hung on every word of Marcus's stories. They asked for advice about writing, about life, about courage. For the first time in years, I felt important, respected, admired. Marcus Vale was everything Alex Thompson wasn't: brave, worldly, articulate, confident. What started as creative writing quickly evolved into something more dangerous. I began incorporating real news events into Marcus's fictional experiences. When there was a terrorist attack in Paris, Marcus had been there covering it. When refugees were fleeing Syria, Marcus had interviewed families at the border. I spent hours researching locations, studying photographs, crafting believable details that would make my stories feel authentic. The community ate it up. I gained thousands of followers across multiple platforms. People would message Marcus asking for career advice, life guidance, even romantic counsel. I felt like I was helping people, inspiring them with tales of resilience and hope. The fact that it was all fiction seemed irrelevant. The emotions and connections were real. But maintaining Marcus Vale's identity became increasingly complex. I had to remember which stories I'd told, which experiences I'd claimed, which people Marcus had supposedly met. I created elaborate backstories about his childhood, his education, his relationships. I researched journalism techniques, military procedures, foreign cultures, anything that would make Marcus's adventures more believable. The real world started feeling gray and disappointing compared to Marcus's exciting digital existence. At work, I was just another corporate drone sitting in meetings and writing marketing copy. But online, I was Marcus Vale, fearless correspondent and inspirational storyteller. I began spending hours every evening maintaining this fiction, responding to messages, crafting new adventures. That's when the first warning signs appeared. Rachel started complaining that I was always on my phone, always distracted, always working on personal writing projects that I wouldn't let her see. My work performance began slipping because I was exhausted from staying up late managing Marcus's online presence. Friends noticed I'd become secretive and withdrawn. But I couldn't stop. Marcus Vale had become more real to me than Alex Thompson. He had purpose, impact, meaning. People looked up to him. He mattered in ways that I never had. The beginning of the end came in March 2024, when a major news publication launched an investigation into fake news and social media disinformation. They were specifically looking at people who claimed to be journalists, but had no verifiable credentials. Someone had flagged Marcus Vale's accounts as potentially fraudulent. I thought I was safe. After all, Marcus was just
a storyteller, not claiming to be a real journalist. But the investigative team started digging deeper. They cross-referenced Marcus's claimed locations with actual news events. They reached out to other journalists who supposedly worked with him. They began unraveling the web of lies I'd spent 8 years weaving.
The first domino fell when they discovered that several of Marcus's eyewitness accounts contained details that had been lifted directly from other journalists' actual reporting. Photos I'd claimed Marcus had taken were actually stock images or pictures stolen from real war correspondents. Stories about interviews with refugees were fabricated using details from legitimate news articles. But here's where the story takes a turn that still gives me nightmares. The investigation revealed that Marcus Vail's fake stories had been cited in academic papers, referenced in other news articles, and even used by nonprofit organizations in grant applications. A charity working with Syrian refugees had quoted Marcus's fictional interview in their fundraising materials, raising over $200,000 based partially on my fabricated story. My lies hadn't just entertained people, they had been treated as legitimate journalism and used to influence real-world decisions. Money had been raised, policies had been discussed, people's understanding of global events had been shaped by stories I'd made up sitting in my Chicago apartment. The investigation was published on a Tuesday morning in April. By Tuesday afternoon, my carefully constructed double life began imploding. The article didn't reveal Marcus Vail's real identity, but it provided enough details that people in my real life started connecting the dots. Rachel found printouts of Marcus's stories in my home office, stories I'd claimed were research for a novel I was writing. She started reading them and realized they were written in first person, as if I'd experienced these events myself. "Alex," she said, her voice shaking, "did you write these? Are you claiming you were in Afghanistan? In Syria? That you interviewed these people?" I tried to explain that it was just creative writing, just fiction, but the evidence was overwhelming. Screenshots of Marcus's social media posts where he'd given people life advice based on his supposed experiences. Messages where he'd comforted people by sharing his trauma from war zones. Followers who'd sent him money to support his journalism. Rachel left that night and hasn't spoken to me since. But that was just the beginning. The next day, someone at my company, I still don't know who, sent an anonymous email to HR containing links to Marcus Vail's accounts and the investigation article. Within hours, I was called into a meeting with my boss and the head of corporate communications. "Alex, we need to discuss your online activities," my boss said, sliding a printed version of the investigation across the table. "Are you Marcus Vail?" I could have denied it. The investigation hadn't definitively identified me. But sitting there, looking at the disappointment in my colleagues' faces, I couldn't lie anymore. "Yes," I said, "but it's not what you think. It's creative writing. Fiction. Fiction that you presented as fact," the communications director replied. "Fiction that influenced real people and real organizations. Alex, you work in marketing. You understand the power of storytelling and the importance of truth in communications. This is a massive ethical violation, and it puts our company's reputation at risk." I was fired that afternoon. 8 years of career advancement gone in one conversation. But the worst was yet to come. The online community that had embraced Marcus Vail felt betrayed in ways I hadn't anticipated. These weren't just random internet strangers. They were real people who had formed genuine emotional connections with a person who didn't exist. They'd shared their own trauma, their fears, their dreams with Marcus. They'd trusted him with intimate details of their lives. When word spread through the community that Marcus Vail was a fraud, the backlash was swift and merciless. People started posting screenshots of private conversations where Marcus had given them advice about dealing with PTSD, grief, relationship problems, advice supposedly based on his own experiences in war zones and crisis situations.
One message particularly haunts me. A young veteran named Sarah had been struggling with PTSD after returning from deployment in Iraq. She'd reached out to Marcus for support, believing he would understand her experiences. Marcus had spent hours messaging with her, sharing fictional stories about his own supposed trauma and recovery. Her public post when she learned the truth was devastating. "Marcus Vail helped me through the darkest period of my life. His stories about surviving war zones and finding purpose gave me hope when I wanted to give up. Now I find out he's some marketing guy from Chicago who made it all up. I feel violated. I feel stupid. I trusted someone who never existed." Dozens of similar posts followed. People who had donated money to support Marcus's supposed journalism. People who had shared his stories to inspire others. People who had modeled their own recovery on his fictional experiences. I had hurt real people with my fake persona, and there was no way to undo that damage. The story went viral within the online writing community and began spreading to mainstream social media. Someone doxed me, posting my real name, address, and workplace online. My LinkedIn profile was flooded with angry messages. My personal social media accounts were bombarded with comments calling me a fraud, a liar, a manipulator. I couldn't leave my apartment without worrying that someone would recognize me. I couldn't apply for new jobs because a Google search of my name brought up hundreds of articles and forum posts about the Marcus Vail scandal. My reputation was destroyed not just online, but in the real world where I had to continue living. The psychological impact was overwhelming. For 8 years, I defined myself partially through Marcus Vail's adventures and achievements. When that identity was ripped away, I felt like I'd lost a fundamental part of myself. But worse was the crushing guilt about the people I'd deceived and potentially harmed. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Jennifer Morrison, who specialized in internet addiction and identity disorders. During our first session, she asked me a question that changed everything. Alex, when you were being Marcus Vail, how did it feel? Powerful, I admitted. Important, like I mattered. And how do you feel as Alex Thompson? Like nobody, I said, and started crying for the first time since the whole scandal broke. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that Marcus Vail hadn't been just a creative outlet. He'd been a coping mechanism for deep-seated feelings of inadequacy and depression that I'd never properly addressed. Instead of dealing with my real problems, I'd escaped into a fantasy where I was the person I wished I could be. The therapy was painful but necessary. I had to confront not just the harm I'd caused others, but the reasons I'd needed to create Marcus in the first place. My father's death had triggered feelings of mortality and meaninglessness that I'd tried to solve by becoming someone extraordinary online, instead of working to improve my actual life. But understanding the psychology behind my actions didn't make the consequences any less real. 3 months after being exposed, I made the decision to write a public apology. Not as Marcus Vail, that identity was dead, but as Alex Thompson, owning up to what I'd done and trying to make whatever amends I could. The apology went viral too, but not in the way I'd hoped. Some people appreciated my honesty and vulnerability. Others saw it as another manipulation, an attempt to rehabilitate my image and play the victim. The comments ranged from supportive to absolutely brutal. One response, though, changed my perspective on everything. It was from Sarah, the veteran I'd deceived during her PTSD recovery. Alex, I'm not ready to forgive you, and I may never be. What you did was cruel, even if you didn't intend it that way. But I want you to know that your fake stories, as much as they hurt me when I learned the truth, did help me get through some dark times. The emotions and connections were real, even if Marcus wasn't. I hate that I have to say this, but maybe that matters somehow. That message made me realize something crucial. The impact of our online actions is real, regardless of our intentions. The people Marcus had inspired were really inspired. The people he'd hurt were really hurt. The money raised based on his stories had really helped refugees, even though the stories were fake. I couldn't undo the lies, but I could commit to living truthfully going forward. Rebuilding has been the hardest thing I've ever done. I moved to Denver to start fresh, taking a job at a small nonprofit where my experience in marketing could actually help people in legitimate ways. I've been completely transparent with my new employer about my past. I've deleted all my social media accounts and committed to living offline except for necessary work communication. Rachel never responded to my attempts to apologize. Most of my old friends have cut me off completely. My family has been supportive, but disappointed in ways that cut deeper than anger would have. But slowly, I'm learning to be comfortable as Alex Thompson, flawed, ordinary, real Alex Thompson. I volunteer at a veterans support center, not because I have any military experience, but because I can help with their communications and fundraising. I'm honest about my limitations and mistakes. I'm building relationships based on truth instead of fiction. 6 months later, I still get recognized occasionally by people who remember the Marcus Vail scandal. Most ignore me, some confront me, a few have actually thanked me for my public apology and honesty about internet addiction. The hardest part is living with the knowledge that my lies may have caused lasting harm to people who trusted me. There's no way to know how many people were affected by Marcus Bale's fictional stories, no way to track all the ripple effects of 8 years of deception. But here's what I've learned and why I'm sharing this story. The internet makes it incredibly easy to become someone else, but it's impossible to completely separate your online and offline lies. Every lie you tell online has the potential to hurt real people in real ways. The connections you form, even under false pretenses, create genuine emotions and consequences. Most importantly, if you're using a fake online identity to escape problems in your real life, you're not solving anything. You're just delaying the inevitable reckoning while potentially hurting innocent people along the way. Marcus Vale felt more real to me than Alex Thompson ever did, but Marcus was just a fantasy. Alex is the person who has to live with the consequences of that fantasy. Alex is the person who has to rebuild trust, make amends, and find meaning in an ordinary life. If you're living a double life online, please stop before you hurt people the way I did. If you're struggling with depression, inadequacy, or the feeling that your real life isn't enough, please get help from real people in the real world. Don't make the same mistakes I did, because the cost of maintaining a lie is always higher than the cost of facing the truth. And the people you deceive along the way, they don't deserve to pay the price for your fantasy. What would you do if you discovered that everything you thought you knew about someone was a lie? How would you feel if you'd trusted, supported, and formed a genuine connection with a person who turned out to be completely fictional? Because that's what I did to hundreds of people, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life.